Hey, and welcome back to my channel. I am Dr. ADHD. A few days ago, I discovered a car available in Assetto Corsa that I actually own in real life. A 1969 Ford Falcon XW. Recently, my channel has been focusing on testing cars and tracks, the physics and the road mesh against my powerful DIY 4 degree of freedom motion simulator platform and my Fanatec CSL 8Nm direct drive wheelbase. My channel is all about motion simulators and how to build 3 and 4 degree of freedom motion simulator platforms. Now fortunately for my viewers, I teach people how to build these 3 and 4 degree of freedom motion simulators. I teach all aspects of the build, from material selection to fabrication, what the best motors and electronics are to use, the best software to use, and how to set all of this up so you too can take full advantage of the wonderful physics and road meshing available in Assetto Corsa and other racing platforms. If you enjoy my content, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notifications bell so that when my next video hits my channel, you'll be able to check it out. Because I discovered this car, it presented a great opportunity to test this and actually see how close the physics of this car actually are to my real-world muscle car. Spoiler alert, the results of my test were actually quite surprising. Now before you run out to get your torches and pitchforks, I understand that these results are going to vary greatly from an actual real-world car like this versus what we get in Assetto Corsa and what I get on my motion simulator and my force feedback steering wheel. Although I have a very powerful and accurate motion simulator, better than most simulators that you can buy, I'd like to remind everybody that as good as it gets with these racing platforms, it is a simulation. It is not real. With the advent of motion simulators and direct drive steering wheels, it does bring us ever so closer to the real thing when we are on our simulations, but it will never be exactly as it is in real life. Zeros and ones just will never cut it versus the analog real world experience, especially when driving an historic vehicle like the 1969 Ford Falcon XW GT-HO. Now, as much as I love drifting, and as much as my motion simulator is more than capable of emulating drifting, I've decided still to do this particular showcase and this test with the Ford XW in an historic race context. And to keep the theme of how it's made, we will be showcasing this with Sergio Loro's fantastic 60s rendition of Watkins Glen. It's also important to note that before I ran this video and tested the motion sim with Sergio's road mesh and the Ford Falcon XW GT-HO, I went into my Sim Tools tuning center to do a parameter capture so that I could get the correct vectors for this car and Sergio's track, so then my motion sim is as tuned as possible for showcasing a car in Assetto Corsa and a car I own in real life. Now, there was never any Group E Aussie muscle raced at Watkins Glen, so you have to use your imagination that the Americans have put out an invite to some Australian organisers to bring over some Australian muscle to showcase at Watkins Glen, along with some English muscle. So just use your imagination, that's how we're going about this, so then we can still showcase Sergio's fantastic Watkins Glen. Now, Watkins Glen is set up on his high road mesh. If you don't know what I'm talking about, click on this link now to see my video where I talk about Sergio's different options for road meshing and how to actually set them up when you download his tracks. So for my test today, I'm using his high road surface road mesh, and I have my motion simulator in Game Manager Profile Editor. The intensity slider is set to 80%. And this is all centered around, as discussed earlier, a tuning center capture, which I've already done with this car on this track. Those vectors have been saved, and now we're racing the most accurately we possibly can via Sim Tools, Sergio's track, the XW, and my motion simulator. Now I'm going to share with you some specifics of my restored XW because elements of that restoration bring it up to spec to a race spec XW of this era. If you are interested, you can click on this link to see my restoration video of my XW, where I rebuilt this car from the ground up. This included extensive head porting work that I undertook myself, so that my stock iron 2V heads could support the large cam that I put in this to support the new 393 cubic inch stroker kit that I rebuilt my motor with. However, today what we're really concerned about is the physics of this Assetto Corsa car and how the creator of this car has designed the physics, and I did try and contact the creator of this car. I've left a message on his YouTube channel, and I hope to actually do an interview with the creator of this car, because at the end of the day he's done a terrific job. This feels extremely realistic to my actual car that I own in the real world. Now this is also down to the way I've tweaked my motion sim and tweaked the sim tool software that runs with my motion sim. Initially when I built my motion sim, I kind of used the physics I understood from my XW as a platform to actually build my motion simulator. Let's talk about what you would have got when you purchased a 1969 Ford Falcon XW GTHO versus the upgrades and the customization I've done with my 1969 stock XW. So my XW started out just as a Falcon 500 with all the spec that would be required to run with a 6-cylinder XW Ford Falcon. Now when I installed that whacking Cleveland 351 that's now been stroked to a 393 cubic inches of displacement, a lot of things needed to be upgraded in the 6-cylinder spec Ford Falcon, including a complete suspension rework, a complete drivetrain rework, and a differential upgrade to handle the torque and the horsepower produced by a 393 cubic inch motor with a very big cam and fuel injection. Now my XW is sporting around 560 horsepower and around 500 foot-pounds of torque, so much more power and torque than what these GTHOs actually had at the time of their production. Now it seems to me by the specs provided by the creator when he's set this up for Assetto Corsa, the power rating for this is rated at 290 horsepower. That is telling me that this was the early XW variant of the GTs, because they were rated at about 290 horsepower, which is what he's listed this at. That means that this was actually a Windsor 351 and not the Cleveland for a start, and this would have been in the first month of production, which was back in May 1969. Within 1 month of the release of the XW GT, they brought out the HO variant. 1 month later, this boosted the actual performance of the XW to 300 horsepower, still using the Windsor 351 as its base power plant. We wouldn't see the 351 Australian-built Cleveland installed into the XWs until 1970. Now the important part of this test between the Assetto Corsa XW and my XW, of course, is going to be the suspension, because it's the physics that we're talking about here. Engine power does play a role in physics, of course, chassis twist, etc., under different levels of torque, but primarily it's going to be the suspension in the cars that should show through the most in the way that the Assetto Corsa vehicle has been put together. This and of course tyre physics. Now this is going to be a tough one. The advent of steel radials was very new at this time when the XW GTHO were being produced, at least in Australia and America. It had been in Europe for a long time, but some of these were produced running plywall tyres, so I'm not sure whether this model has been based around ply tyres or whether it's been based around steel radials. And until I can actually talk to the creator of this car, I won't know that for sure. But one thing I can tell you is he's done an amazing job. The way this feels in my motion sim is so close to the real deal, it's amazing. Now with a plywall tyre car, you can't have anything like the camber or the caster that you can set up with a steel radial. So I've got to guess that he's used steel radial specs for this, and so we'll assume that is the case, so that we are more like apples for apples between my car and this Assetto Corsa XW. My XW sports very similar specs to the GTHO XW. HO standing for handling option. So it had the larger anti-roll bars, or sway bars as we know them here in Australia, on the front and the rear. And this is what I've installed into my custom XW. Now originally my 6-cylinder XW only had a 3-pack leaf spring set in the rear. I've since upgraded to be a GT compliant leaf spring setup in the rear of my XW, so it now has a 6-pack leaf spring with a rebound leaf spring on top. This is what you got with the GT HO variant of the Ford Falcon XW in 1969. The GT HO used shortened front hardened race springs for its front suspension, and my XW uses king spring stubby race springs in the front, mimicking the 1969 GT HO. Unfortunately, I couldn't find specifics on what type of shock absorbers were used with the GT HO, but I could be quite confident that they would have been a telescopic hydraulic type of shock absorber used on the front and the rear of the GT HO. I selected Coney hydraulic shock absorbers for my XW, so they would be very close, if not better, than the original GT HO spec shock absorbers. The other thing I'm not sure about is traction bars. I have fabricated and installed a set of traction bars into my XW. Because of my gobs of torque in my XW, you need to resist spring wind-up, what's known as leaf spring wind-up, and what happens is your springs end up going into an S shape when you get on the loud pedal. This can cause pinion to crown climb in your differential, which basically puts your rear uni joint on your tail shaft at a really severe angle from diff to your transmission, and this can cause rear uni joint failure quite frequently. So I've installed traction bars which basically hold my diff rigid and stop spring wind-up, basically leaf spring wind-up. I'm not sure if the XW GT HOs had that. I know for a fact that the XAs, which were a few years later, had traction bars, and I think some XYs, which was the model after the XW, the model that dominated Bathurst with the 351 Cleveland with the big 4V heads. They also, in some cases, had traction bars, maybe not from factory, but definitely modified by the teams and installed to stop that leaf spring wind-up. So I've tried to be as accurate as I can be within the computer digital age with what I have, with the motion sim I've designed, with its specifications, with the software that I'm able to manipulate and tweak to try and get my motion simulator and the way that it reacts and moves with this particular XW GTHO created for Assetto Corsa to be on par with the way that my actual Ford 1969 XW behaves in real life. And as I said earlier, it really is very, very close. The inertia that I'm getting in my motion sim when I'm braking, not as much surge as what I get in my actual XW, and that's to be expected because of my large amount of torque and, you know, higher horsepower than what this particular Assetto Corsa version of the XW has been modelled around. But they still feel really, really close as far as the actual physics for the tyres and for the body roll, for the pitching basically on the actual car itself, like when I brake, how much the car actually pitches down under braking, how much it lifts under acceleration. They're close, you know. It's quite amazing really, considering this is a digital zeros and ones versus, you know, what is actually happening in real life. So the creator of this ABB Creations, he calls himself, Aussie Big Banger, he's got a Facebook page that basically has all of the cars I'm pretty sure that he's created. There's a one link to all of those cars. They're all basically mostly Australian Group E, Group C, classic Australian muscle cars that were raced in the Australian Touring Car Championships. They're all available at his Facebook, and there's a link I've included in the description to that Facebook page, and you can download these cars from there. He's got a lot of links to Mediafire, etc., to download the cars that he's created. And he's a very good creator. He's got a lot of attention to detail, and I think he's done a wonderful job recreating that amazing era of Australian Touring Car Championships with this old 60s and 70s muscle. Well, my next video, guys, will be centered around another Sergio Loro track and the amazing Japanese-built Isuzu Bellette GTR. I'm going to talk about the history I have personally with the Bellette GTR. A friend of mine owned one of those for a number of years, and we drove the absolute hell out of that car, and it nearly killed us at one stage, and I'll talk about that as well. And we'll be doing a demonstration again with the motion sim and how I can get my motion sim tweaked with that particular car based on the real world experience had with that car and the fact that we belted the absolute living daylights out of it for a number of years. But right now I'm that hungry I can eat the crutch out of a low flying seagull, so I'm going to make a pit stop and grab a snack. Thanks for tuning in. You guys stay safe, stay healthy, and take it easy out there. Well, very nice of the Americans to invite us Aussies over to Watkins Glen for a bit of a drive around in our muscle cars, but I'm starving. That looks like some kind of food alley over there where those lights are. Hey fellas, any chance of a nice hot meat pie around here? Hey? No speaker English, huh? Well, it looks like I'm going for a walk.